From the moment Officer Martinez took the stand, the courtroom felt like a stage, and he acted as though every eye deserved to witness the greatest performance of his career. He spoke with the kind of polished conviction that fooled audiences who wanted to believe in the myth of the noble officer standing firm against a dangerous citizen. His voice carried an air of practiced sincerity as he described a woman he painted as unstable, entitled, and violently unpredictable. Yet the calm, composed Dr. Kesha Williams sat silently beside her public defender, her expression revealing none of the outrage the prosecution expected. Instead, she watched Martinez with the quiet attentiveness of someone who had seen this performance many times before, someone who catalogued each lie with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a critical operation. Every claim he made, the violent outburst, the threatening gestures, the hostile attitude, flowed seamlessly, as if he had memorized a script crafted to absolve himself of wrongdoing before anyone even asked questions. And when the prosecutor asked him about the missing body camera footage, he tilted his head with such calculated remorse that even jurors leaned forward, as though witnessing a tragic hero lamenting failed technology rather than a man concealing truth. But what Martinez didn't anticipate was that his audience included someone who recognized the cadence of perjury, someone who'd spent years dissecting false testimonies across multiple jurisdictions. So while he described her as belligerent, she noted the inflection of his voice each time he embellished a detail. While he insisted she lunged toward a weapon, she mentally filed the statement next to federal documentation she knew would contradict him. And as he soaked in the admiration of those convinced by his uniform, he remained blissfully unaware that the woman he targeted wasn't an ordinary defendant at all. She was calm because she understood something he didn't. Every single fabrication he fed into the record wasn't just a lie. It was evidence. And not just evidence of misconduct, but evidence in a federal civil rights investigation already underway long before his patrol car lights flashed behind her vehicle. In a courtroom packed with spectators who assumed they were watching a simple traffic case unfold, not a single person realized they were witnessing Martinez unknowingly seal his own fate, one lie at a time. When the defense called Dr. Kesha Williams to the stand, the entire energy of the courtroom shifted with the weight of her presence. She didn't walk like someone trapped in a criminal case. She moved with the composure of someone who understood the law intimately, someone accustomed to dissecting events under sworn testimony. The room settled into an anticipatory hush as she took her seat, her posture straight, her voice steady when affirming the oath. And as her attorney asked what actually happened that night, her recounting dismantled every part of Martinez's story with methodical precision. She described driving at the posted speed limit after a professional meeting on federal oversight procedures. She recounted providing her license and documents exactly as trained. She explained how Martinez's demeanor shifted the moment he saw her address and questioned how someone like her could afford it. And each detail she offered wasn't the emotional defense of an accused citizen. It was a factual reconstruction delivered with the clarity of someone who had testified in far more serious proceedings. The prosecutor tried to rattle her, objecting repeatedly as she referenced federal civil rights guidelines, but each objection only magnified what jurors were slowly realizing. This woman spoke with the authority of someone who lived in the world of law enforcement oversight, not someone unfamiliar with police procedure. The judge himself leaned forward, clearly aware something unusual was unfolding. And when asked about her qualifications, Kesha stated calmly that she held a doctorate in criminal justice administration and had testified as an expert witness in multiple federal civil rights cases. The revelation rippled through the courtroom like a low-voltage shock. Martinez shifted in his chair, suddenly recognizing the danger of underestimating her. She continued dismantling his allegations point by point. She never raised her voice, never reached for anything, never threatened him. Her hands remained visible throughout. Her demeanor stayed calm. The interaction escalated only when Martinez initiated hostility. And then, with the same measured tone, she revealed she had documented the encounter using methods consistent with federal evidence collection protocols. The prosecutor froze. Jurors exchanged looks. Martinez felt a cold shiver run through him, because this wasn't just a defendant contradicting an officer. This was a professional trained to document civil rights violations, hinting at evidence far beyond what anyone expected. By the time she finished speaking, it was no longer a question of who was telling the truth. It was a question of how deep Martinez's lies truly went. The courtroom's unraveling accelerated when the defense introduced new witnesses, ordinary citizens whose testimonies transformed Martinez's crafted narrative into a crumbling tower of deceit. The first was Mr. Park, a quiet electronics store owner whose surveillance cameras captured the entire traffic stop with crisp clarity. The moment the footage appeared on the courtroom monitor, Martinez's confidence disintegrated. Jurors saw Kesha sitting calmly, her hands exactly where she said they were, her demeanor composed, her every movement contradicting Martinez's tale of chaos. And then came the audio. The jury heard Martinez's voice, sharp, prejudiced, unmistakable, asking how someone like her could afford an affluent address, telling her people from her background needed to respect authority. Gasps filled the courtroom as jurors confronted the undeniable truth. The defendant hadn't been hostile. The officer had been antagonistic from the start. As if that weren't enough, more witnesses took the stand. Citizens who recounted eerily similar encounters with Martinez, fabricated aggression, false accusations, and reports that didn't match reality. Mrs. Washington, an elderly churchgoer, recalled the humiliation she endured when Martinez lied about her conduct despite peaceful security footage proving otherwise. None of these people knew each other, yet their stories followed the same pattern. Kesha watched all of this quietly, taking notes not as a defendant, but like a federal investigator cataloging misconduct. Martinez's partner slipped out of the courtroom, unwilling to be connected to the collapsing facade. Even the prosecutor's expression shifted from confidence to dread, as each witness further dismantled his star officer's credibility. By the time the judge ordered a recess to process the avalanche of contradictions, the courtroom was buzzing with whispers. People who had once assumed Martinez's uniform guaranteed honesty now questioned every word he had spoken. Spectators sensed they were no longer witnessing a routine criminal trial, but the exposure of systematic abuse buried beneath years of authority and unchallenged lies. And beneath it all, Kesha's calm watching made one thing clear. She wasn't surprised by any of it. She had expected these truths to surface. She had prepared for this moment. What no one realized, not yet, was that the most explosive revelation was still hidden inside her briefcase, ready to transform the entire courtroom into the epicenter of a federal storm Martinez had never imagined. The courtroom atmosphere turned electric when Kesha stood and presented her federal credentials. It was as if every molecule in the room froze midair. Her calm voice carried a weight that transformed the courtroom from a local legal proceeding into the threshold of a federal reckoning. Dr. Kesha Williams, Senior Inspector, Civil Rights Division, United States Department of Justice. The words hit like a grenade. The prosecutor stumbled backward. Jurors gaped. Spectators erupted in startled whispers, and Martinez, once smug, confident, unshakable, lost all color in his face as fear overwhelmed his expression. In a single moment, he realized the woman he lied about wasn't just professionally knowledgeable. She was a federal officer conducting an undercover investigation into civil rights violations within his department. His perjury wasn't merely unethical. It was a federal crime committed under oath against a federal investigator. Kesha presented documentation authorizing her undercover assignment, proving she had been gathering evidence long before their encounter. She explained that federal surveillance protocols had captured every aspect of the traffic stop, including backups Martinez didn't know existed. Each word she spoke tightened the noose around his fabricated defense. The judge reviewed her credentials with visible astonishment. The prosecution was speechless, their case shattered. The gallery buzzed with disbelief as Kesha laid out the systematic patterns she'd uncovered: 47 prior complaints, consistent racial targeting, deliberate falsification in reports, and evidence of coordinated cover-ups by department supervisors. Martinez's earlier confidence now looked delusional. He had believed he was teaching a lesson to a black woman he assumed would never be believed. Instead, he had delivered incriminating testimony against a federal inspector who specialized in exposing officers like him. And as she handed over files detailing months of federal evidence, the courtroom realized they weren't simply watching a defendant reveal her identity. They were witnessing the collapse of an entire system of corruption. Judge Harrison, recognizing the gravity, declared the case now under federal jurisdiction. Reporters rushed out of the gallery to alert news networks. Martinez's lawyer whispered frantically, but there was no strategy to counter federal documentation, no defense against surveillance footage, and no way to undo perjured testimony etched into the record. Kesha returned to her seat, composed, steady, professional. Martinez, meanwhile, sat trembling, aware that everything he built his career on was about to be obliterated, not by an accusation, but by the truth revealed through federal authority. And the courtroom braced itself for what came next, her cross-examination. When Kesha began her cross-examination, her voice carried the controlled intensity of someone who had navigated federal investigations far more complex than a small-town courtroom drama. Martinez sat stiffly, his earlier bravado shattered, his hands trembling as she approached with a file thick enough to carry the weight of his downfall. The jurors leaned forward, captivated by the reversal of roles. The officer who once presented himself as protector now cornered by the very system he abused. Kesha opened with a question that hit like a hammer. Did he understand that perjury against a federal officer was punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison? His voice cracked as he answered yes. She pressed him relentlessly, exposing fabrication after fabrication. You testified I lunged toward a weapon. Surveillance footage proves I never moved. That wasn't misremembering, it was perjury. Martinez stammered, unable to hide behind vague phrasing as she confronted him with documented evidence. Then she addressed the years of misconduct he thought he buried. She recited the cases, Mrs. Washington, Mr. Robinson, multiple citizens whose lives he tarnished with invented aggression. With each example, Martinez shrank further. The gallery sat in stunned silence as she unveiled federal records showing 47 prior false reports, patterns of targeting black citizens, and testimonies he'd embellished to justify arrests that never should have happened. When she asked why every fabricated report involved a black citizen in an affluent neighborhood, Martinez broke under pressure, attempting to justify his actions with claims of maintaining authority and teaching respect. His whispered admissions confirmed what the federal investigation had already documented: systematic lies disguised as law enforcement. The judge, listening intently, watched as the officer's world unraveled under the precision of Kesha's questioning. Spectators felt the weight of years of injustice rising to the surface. And when Martinez finally confessed to manipulating evidence and lying in multiple cases, the courtroom erupted into shocked murmurs. Kesha didn't gloat. She didn't show anger. She simply stated, with the authority of her position, that he had confessed to felony-level civil rights violations under color of law. Then she recommended immediate federal involvement. By the time she returned to her seat, the man who once believed his badge granted him untouchable power sat broken. Realizing the truth he tried to weaponize against others had now become the force destroying him. The courtroom, still reeling, understood they had just witnessed the turning point of a historic federal case. The courtroom's momentum shifted into full federal territory when the jury prepared for closing arguments. Judge Harrison addressed the gravity of what they had witnessed: systematic perjury, civil rights violations, manipulation of authority, and a federal inspector standing before them not as a defendant, but as the victim of attempted character assassination. Martinez's badge and weapon were confiscated on the spot, the symbolic stripping of power that had shielded him for years. When Kesha was invited to present a closing statement, she approached the jury with the quiet force of someone fighting not just for herself, but for every person harmed by abuses of authority. She spoke of truth versus lies, not in abstract morality, but as the foundation of the justice system. She explained how perjury wasn't merely a dishonest act. It was a weapon corrupt officials used to imprison the innocent, destroy reputations, and silence marginalized voices. She revealed how Martinez's years of misconduct had gone unchecked because authority had been mistaken for integrity. And she showed the jury the victims: Mrs. Washington, Mr. Robinson, and the dozens of citizens whose trust in law enforcement had been shattered by one officer's power-drunk crusade. The jurors listened, spellbound, as she described how federal oversight only steps in when local systems fail to prevent abuse. Her voice never wavered, even as she exposed the depth of Martinez's pattern, each example echoing through the courtroom as a testament to the lives affected. Meanwhile, Martinez sat slumped, unable to lift his gaze, his arrogance replaced with the hollow stare of someone finally confronting the consequences of unchecked authority. When Kesha conkled, she reminded the jury that justice didn't serve itself. It required courage from those willing to hold the powerful accountable. Within 30 minutes of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: not guilty on all charges against Dr. Kesha Williams. The courtroom erupted in applause, not simply because she was vindicated, but because truth had conquered manipulation. And then came the moment the entire town would talk about for years. Federal marshals entered with arrest warrants for Martinez. His crimes, systematic perjury, obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, were now official federal charges. As he was led away in handcuffs, the community witnessed what true accountability looked like. It wasn't revenge. It was justice meeting abuse head-on, backed by federal authority and anchored in irrefutable truth. Kesha quietly gathered her files, knowing the battle ahead was far larger than this courtroom. In the months following the trial, the consequences of Martinez's lies rippled far beyond his arrest. The Department of Justice launched a full investigation into the police department that enabled his misconduct. What began as one officer's perjury evolved into a sweeping federal audit revealing systemic failures. Supervisors who ignored complaints, colleagues who protected fabricated reports, and leadership that prioritized departmental image over constitutional rights. Under a federal consent decree, the department faced comprehensive reforms: tamper-proof body cameras, independent oversight committees, mandatory civil rights training, and automatic federal review for any complaint involving excessive force or false reporting. Officers who had once dismissed citizen concerns now realized every action was subject to scrutiny. Meanwhile, Martinez sat in federal prison serving his sentence for conspiracy to violate civil rights, systematic perjury, and obstruction. The decorated officer who wielded his authority like a weapon now lived behind the bars he once assumed would contain others. His pension vanished, his certification revoked, his legacy erased. But the transformation didn't end with punishment. It extended to healing. 17 victims whose lives Martinez scarred received federal compensation, their records expunged, and their voices finally amplified. Community members who once feared speaking out now attended public forums where federal representatives ensured transparency. The department that once dismissed concerns now listened because federal oversight required it. And at the center of this transformation was Kesha, whose undercover investigation had exposed not just a corrupt officer but an entire system built on silence. Her work became a national case study, proof that accountability wasn't theoretical but achievable when truth was documented, pursued, and presented without fear. When she took the stage at the National Civil Rights Conference, the audience rose to their feet. They weren't applauding the dramatic courtroom moment. They were honoring the courage it took to infiltrate a system that assumed she would never be believed. She spoke not of victory, but of responsibility, explaining that federal authority exists to protect citizens when local safeguards fail. Her daughter, Maya, watched proudly as her mother received the DOJ's highest commendation. And in that moment, the story wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about restoring trust. It was about showing communities nationwide that justice could prevail even when those sworn to uphold it become its greatest threat. It was a reminder that a badge doesn't define integrity. Actions do. And federal oversight ensures those actions have consequences. So as the years passed and reforms reshaped the once corrupted department, the legacy of this case didn't fade. It grew. It became a reminder that every courtroom lie leaves a trail, every abuse of authority leaves evidence, and every attempt to silence truth only strengthens the resolve of those willing to fight for justice. Kesha continued her federal work with renewed purpose, fueled by the knowledge that one traffic stop had become the catalyst for an entire region's transformation. She often said that justice isn't loud, it's persistent. It's the voice that refuses to be drowned out by intimidation, the evidence that survives fabrication, the truth that withstands scrutiny. And her story proved that even when corruption hides behind badges and polished testimonies, federal accountability doesn't just expose lies, it dismantles them. Today, the victims who once feared the legal system walk with dignity restored, their names cleared, their trauma acknowledged by the highest levels of government. The police department that once operated unchecked now functions under transparent oversight. And Martinez, sitting in federal prison, became a cautionary tale for officers nationwide. The uniform protects only those who protect the truth. For every listener hearing this story, remember, this isn't fiction. It's a reality rooted in courage, documentation, and the power of refusing to bow to injustice. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes, if it reminded you why accountability matters, then become part of the movement that keeps these stories alive. Hit the like button so this story reaches more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to stay connected to voices that refuse to be silenced. Turn on notifications because every week we uncover stories that expose corruption, uplift truth, and amplify the experiences too many people tried to bury. And if you believe in justice, if you believe in accountability, if you believe that truth should always outshine power, share this story. Share it for those who never got their day in court. Share it for communities still fighting for reform. Share it because every view becomes a witness, every comment becomes a voice, and every subscription becomes part of a growing force dedicated to protecting civil rights. This is Black Voices Uncut, where truth is never edited to comfort the powerful, and where stories like Kesha's remind the world that justice doesn't whisper. Justice speaks boldly. Justice stands firm. And justice always finds the truth.